Most people believe that terrifying giant monsters only exist in old Scottish lakes or hidden deep ocean trenches far away from modern civilization. The dark, muddy waters of the Altamaha River in Georgia hide a massive prehistoric secret that shatters that comforting illusion completely and permanently. For centuries, native fishermen and local politicians alike have reported a creature known as the Altamaha, stalking these unpredictable southern water currents. Dozens of highly detailed eyewitness accounts describe a massive grey serpent possessing an alligator snout and a strange prehistoric bony dorsal ridge. The official scientific explanation has never managed to erase the terrifying physical evidence found along these deeply isolated and completely muddy riverbanks. The unpredictable coastal weather in Georgia brought a remarkably thick fog over the isolated marshlands during the early spring of 1830. Captain Delano stood firmly on the wooden deck of the commercial schooner Eagle near the muddy mouth of the deep Altamaha River. The dark water churned violently around the heavy wooden hull, shaking the massive sailing vessel from side to side without any warning. 5 highly experienced sailors grabbed the wet rigging, staring down into the murky currents flowing rapidly beneath the solid wooden deck planks. A massive grey shape emerged slowly from the dirty river foam, moving purposefully against the natural flow of the strong ocean tide. The captain pulled his heavy brass telescope, focusing the thick glass lenses on the massive creature breaking the surface of the river. He documented a bizarre beast measuring 70 feet in length, matching the thick circumference of a traditional wooden maritime cargo barrel. The creature possessed the elongated snout of a mature alligator, but completely lacked the traditional rough scales of a normal aquatic reptile. 2 large front flippers slapped the water loudly, propelling the heavy beast forward like an overgrown grey marine mammal hunting for prey. The creature vanished silently beneath the dark waves, leaving behind a massive trail of thick bubbles and violently disturbed brown river mud. Delano returned to the local port quickly, carrying a bizarre story that threatened to destroy his hard-earned professional maritime reputation forever. The Savannah, Georgia newspaper published his highly detailed account on the 18th of April, shocking the wealthy coastal planters reading the news. Several respected plantation owners living on St. Simon's Island stepped forward to publicly corroborate the strange maritime report with their own sightings. They had watched the same enormous grey silhouette hunting near the shallow shorelines during the quiet and foggy early hours of dawn. This was not the random hallucination of a drunk sailor, but a collective observation made by highly respected community pillars and businessmen. The historical archives of the local newspaper preserve these written reports as serious nautical incidents, not as cheap fictional local ghost stories. The Altamaha River stretches for 137 miles, winding through deep, dark forests and abandoned colonial agricultural rice fields. The muddy riverbed contains numerous deep pockets of stagnant water, creating perfect natural hiding spots for massive and unknown aquatic predators. Many wealthy merchant traders dismissed the 1830 report as a bizarre misidentification of a common right whale swimming near the shore. But whales do not possess the rough, elongated snout of an alligator, nor do they navigate extremely shallow and twisting marshland channels. The sheer physical size of the mysterious animal defied the known biological catalogue of the entire American southern coastal region without explanation. A silent panic slowly gripped the isolated river communities, keeping local commercial fishermen away from the deep fishing spots late at night. The creature earned a permanent mythological name among the frightened local population, becoming known simply and fearfully as the legendary Altamaha. Decades passed with occasional violent splashing sounds echoing in the dark, but the massive river serpent managed to avoid direct human capture. The rapid and loud industrialization of the late 19th century pushed heavy steamships and noisy mechanical machinery into the previously quiet waterways. Arrogant skeptics assumed the heavy boat traffic would easily scare away any strange prehistoric beast hiding quietly in the dark river mud. The loud noise of modern progress was supposed to erase the terrifying old nautical legends from the practical minds of modern industrial workers. But the extremely deep river channels held organic secrets, older than the heavy iron anchors repeatedly dropped by the loud commercial freighters. The creature did not abandon its ancient ancestral hunting grounds when the large logging companies arrived on the muddy shores to work. The exhausted men cutting down the ancient trees were about to realize they were not alone in the freezing water. Long before the heavy British colonial ships reached the Georgia coast, the wild land belonged exclusively to the native Tama indigenous tribe. These indigenous communities lived peacefully alongside the twisting channels of the Altamaha River for countless generations before any permanent European settlement arrived. Their ancient oral traditions described a massive aquatic predator hunting aggressively in the flooded marshes and deep freshwater river bends during twilight. The wise tribal elders spoke of a giant hissing serpent that terrorized the native fishermen working near the muddy banks for survival. This ancient beast possessed a strange bony ridge along its dark muscular spine, cutting through the muddy water with absolutely terrifying speed. The experienced indigenous hunters knew exactly where the deep river pockets formed naturally, avoiding those dark waters completely during the evening hours. The violent arrival of European settlers forced the native populations away from the river, but the terrifying aquatic stories remained firmly behind. When General Oglethorpe brought tough Scottish Highlanders to establish a new military outpost, they also heard the strange hissing from the water. Fort King George stood near the damp river mouth, surrounded completely by unpredictable coastal weather and vast stretches of dangerous muddy marshland. The exhausted Scottish soldiers recorded bizarre sounds echoing from the dark water during their incredibly lonely night guard duties near the perimeter. A creeping sense of psychological dread infected the isolated military camp, heavily fueled by the mysterious massive shadows moving offshore every night. The remote military outpost was eventually abandoned entirely, leaving the ruined wooden palisades to rot slowly in the humid and unforgiving southern climate. The dark waters of the Altamaha River reclaimed the empty land quickly, preserving its ancient aquatic ecosystem without any further human interference. This massive river basin remains the second largest on the entire eastern coast today, holding millions of gallons of slow-moving, muddy water. The highly complex network of small streams creates a perfect natural labyrinth for a massive aquatic creature actively trying to remain hidden. Abandoned colonial rice fields flooded completely over the decades, adding shallow artificial lakes to the already massive wilderness river system in Georgia. Visibility beneath the murky river surface barely exceeds a few inches due to the incredibly thick mud and rotting organic vegetation debris. A creature measuring 30 feet long could easily swim just below a small wooden boat without ever being noticed by the passengers. The local fishermen eventually learned to recognize a sudden drop in temperature and an unexplained profound silence in the surrounding green marshes. These subtle environmental clues usually preceded a violent physical disturbance in the dark water currents near their heavy metal boat anchors. The dark legends of the Altamaha survived the brutal American Civil War, passing carefully from generation to generation of local rural residents. Terrified parents constantly warned their young children to avoid the deep river bends, fearing the ancient grey beast was still actively hunting. In the early 1920s, commercial timbermen began floating massive cut logs down the river toward the busy mechanical lumber mills. These tough industrial workers spent weeks floating precariously on the unpredictable currents, sleeping near the muddy river shores in small temporary camps. One particularly foggy morning, a crew of exhausted loggers noticed a massive dark shape moving exactly parallel to their floating timber harvest. The creature easily matched the speed of the rapid current, displaying a massive horizontal tail that propelled it forward with incredible efficiency. The rough working men grabbed their heavy iron tools defensively, watching the massive beast glide silently beneath the murky brown river water. The creature did not attack the frightened workers directly, but its immense physical size left them completely paralyzed with a profound fear. The official logging company reports mentioned a giant swimming snake, carefully avoiding the indigenous tribal name to protect their professional industrial pride. But the thick green woods surrounding the riverbanks were silently preparing to reveal even more impossible biological evidence to the public. The thick Georgian wilderness remained a highly popular destination for brave local hunters during the unusually cold autumn of 1935. A small group of heavily armed men walked slowly along the muddy edge of the river, searching actively for wild local game. The calm water suddenly erupted into a violent spray of freezing white foam near the exact center of the deep river channel. The startled hunters aimed their heavy rifles immediately, expecting to see a large black bear swimming aggressively across the cold water current. Instead, a massive grey reptilian head broke the surface violently, attached to a thick muscular neck lacking any visible external animal ears. The bizarre beast stared directly at the armed men for a brief, terrifying second before diving rapidly back into the dark depths. The intensely frightened hunters ran frantically back to the nearby town, leaving their expensive tracking equipment scattered uselessly in the wet mud. Their frantic police testimony matched the old maritime accounts perfectly, describing a beast far larger than any known river alligator in Georgia. A few short years later, a troop of young Boy Scouts camped happily near the quiet, muddy edge of the isolated marshlands. The experienced scout leader was patiently teaching the young boys how to identify local wildlife tracks pressed deeply into the soft mud. A loud and violent splashing noise interrupted the nature lesson, drawing their immediate collective attention toward the middle of the deep channel. The terrified children watched an enormous grey creature rolling violently in the water, exposing a strangely pale yellowish-white underbelly to them. The massive beast possessed large front flippers and a distinct bony ridge, matching the exact physical description provided by the native tribes. The frantic scout leader ordered an immediate evacuation of the rural campsite, forcing the crying children away from the dangerous river shore. The creature sank silently beneath the muddy waves again, leaving behind a profound psychological trauma on the young and impressionable eyewitnesses. The local municipal authorities dismissed the alarming sighting as an overactive collective imagination fueled heavily by old traditional campfire ghost stories. But the detailed reports continued to flood the local police stations, coming regularly from highly credible and professionally trained adult observers. In the 1950s, two high-ranking government officials from the Reedsville State Prison took a small metal boat out for recreational fishing. These men were rigorously trained to handle highly dangerous situations and carefully observe minute details in extremely stressful and chaotic prison environments. They cast their heavy fishing nets into a very quiet section of the river, waiting patiently for a large catch of fish. The small aluminum boat suddenly lurched violently sideways, nearly throwing the two heavy prison guards completely into the freezing, muddy river water. A massive grey body brushed aggressively against the metal hull, creating a terrifying scraping sound against the painted bottom of the boat. The trained prison officials stared in absolute horror as a 20-foot creature surfaced just 10 short yards away from their vulnerable position. The bizarre beast possessed the smooth grey skin of a porpoise, but moved with the highly aggressive, chaotic energy of an apex predator. The two terrified men immediately started the loud outboard boat engine, racing frantically back toward the relative safety of the wooden docks. They filed a formal official incident report upon returning, absolutely refusing to ever step foot in that specific river section ever again. The sheer massive volume of independent visual reports made it mathematically impossible to dismiss every single professional witness as a creative liar. Something incredibly massive and entirely unclassified was actively sharing the intricate natural waterways with the rapidly growing human population of rural Georgia. The unknown beast seemed to be growing significantly bolder, moving much closer to the heavily populated residential areas during the warm summer. The small, quiet fishing community of Clark's Bluff was about to host the most intensely detailed and terrifying aquatic encounter of the century. The warm summer sun beat down heavily on the muddy shores of Clark's Bluff during the humid month of July in 1969. Two experienced local brothers sat quietly in a small wooden fishing boat, casting their heavy synthetic lines into the incredibly slow current. The river water level was unusually low that week, exposing large patches of incredibly thick brown mud along the steep riverbanks. One of the observant brothers noticed a strange physical disturbance in the calm water about 50 yards directly ahead of their boat. A remarkably long grey shape rested quietly near the muddy surface, resembling a large piece of forgotten, sunken industrial logging equipment initially. The curious men slowly rowed their boat closer, assuming they had discovered a massive dead Atlantic sturgeon floating in the afternoon sun. The massive creature suddenly shifted its incredible weight, revealing a thick, muscular body completely devoid of any traditional shiny fish scales. The absolutely terrified brothers froze completely in their wooden seats, realizing the strange animal was actively watching them approach the shallow bank. The bizarre beast measured approximately 12 feet in overall length, suggesting it was merely a younger juvenile specimen of the legendary monster. Its elongated snout strongly resembled the highly aggressive jaw of a local alligator, but the horizontal tail moved up and down incredibly smoothly. Common fish move their tails from side to side, but marine mammals naturally propel themselves with powerful vertical tail strokes in the water. This massive biological contradiction terrified the highly experienced fishermen, proving the creature was an unknown species of massive aquatic river mammal entirely. The disturbed animal suddenly let out a loud and aggressive hissing sound, echoing loudly across the completely quiet surface of the river. This specific, aggressive noise matched the exact ancient written descriptions meticulously recorded by the Scottish soldiers in the late 18th century perfectly. The massive creature suddenly thrashed its incredibly powerful tail, diving deep beneath the thick muddy water in a highly violent vertical splash. A massive rogue wave of dark river water hit the small wooden boat instantly, soaking the two violently trembling brothers completely wet. They rowed frantically and desperately back to the safety of the main wooden dock, abandoning their highly expensive fishing gear forever behind. Their detailed public interview with the local town press added a terrifying new layer of serious credibility to the old regional legends. They provided incredibly exact physical descriptions to the reporters, drawing highly accurate visual sketches of the bony ridge running along the back. The local state newspapers published the terrifying aquatic encounter, drawing the immediate attention of curious cryptozoologists from across the entire American country. Independent researchers began carefully mapping the myriad of small river streams, looking desperately for hidden underwater caves or deep isolated nesting grounds. They quickly discovered that the river basin contained countless completely unexplored deep channels, perfectly concealed by incredibly thick, overhanging green marsh vegetation. The profoundly dark water provided perfect natural biological camouflage for a massive green or grey creature actively hunting near the murky bottom. The sudden chaotic influx of curious amateur tourists carrying expensive cameras intensely annoyed the traditional local residents simply trying to work peacefully. Many highly serious professional fishermen completely refused to talk about the beast anymore, fearing intense public ridicule from arrogant city newspaper journalists. The intentional silence of the local working class created a profound, dark informational void around the true biological nature of the creature. But the massive aquatic monster did not care about the trivial local politics or the rapidly growing media circus surrounding its existence. The legendary Altamaha was silently preparing to reveal itself directly to a single witness whose professional credibility could not be easily attacked. The dark, muddy water under the heavy concrete municipal bridge was hiding a massive secret completely ready to break the calm surface. The freezing winter air was incredibly crisp on the 23rd of December in the incredibly cold year of 1973. The highly respected former mayor of Darien, Scotty Rogers, drove his heavy American car along the paved surface of Highway 17 alone. He rapidly approached the large modern concrete bridge crossing the freezing dark waters of the Champney River during the late Sunday afternoon. The former town mayor casually glanced out the glass passenger window, observing the perfectly calm surface of the muddy water below him. A massive, strange grey object suddenly broke the water surface, catching his immediate focused attention and forcing him to instinctively slow down. At very first glance, the strange floating object strongly resembled a massive inflated rubber inner tube from a large commercial agricultural tractor. But the incredibly dark shape was actively moving vertically out of the freezing water, completely defying the basic natural laws of buoyancy. Rogers rolled down his heavy mechanical car window, staring in absolute psychological disbelief at the biologically impossible creature emerging directly below him. A thick, muscular grey neck attached seamlessly to the main animal body rose incredibly high above the muddy surface of the river. The massive neck measured almost 2 full feet in diameter, completely covered in smooth grey skin, dripping heavily with dirty river water. The strange animal head strongly resembled that of a large farm horse, but it completely lacked any visible ears or traditional hair. The bizarre creature turned its massive head slowly, surveying the quiet, freezing marshlands with a terrifying display of pure, ancient, prehistoric power. Rogers stopped his heavy car completely on the bridge, risking a serious traffic accident just to watch the legendary beast in daylight. The strange animal clearly did not possess aquatic gills, meaning it had to physically break the surface to breathe the cold air. After a few incredibly tense seconds, the heavy grey beast sank completely silently back into the dark, muddy depths without making a splash. The terrified former mayor drove straight into the local town, his hands visibly shaking violently against the cold leather of the steering wheel. He courageously shared his terrifying personal encounter publicly, placing his firmly established political reputation on the line for the absolute truth. When a highly respected former mayor explicitly reports seeing a monster, the entire local community is forcefully compelled to take the claims seriously. The dedicated local newspaper editor meticulously collected dozens of strikingly similar reports from scared ordinary citizens over the following 2 entire decades. A seasoned commercial crab fisherman working tirelessly in the 1980s described the strange creature as the absolutely biggest eel in the world. Another ordinary man casually pulling his small boat near Brunswick in 2002 saw a 20-foot creature surface very close nearby. The incredibly consistent physical descriptions, stretching across several different centuries, heavily pointed to a living, breeding population, not a single immortal monster. The complex Altamaha river system was apparently actively supporting a totally hidden biological family of massive predators perfectly adapted to the thick mud. The arrogant scientific community finally decided to actively intervene, attempting desperately to provide a highly rational explanation for the terrifying local panic. Educated biologists immediately pointed to the massive Atlantic sturgeon, a primitive prehistoric fish that routinely migrates far up the complex Georgia rivers. These highly aggressive ancient fish possess large armored bony plates and can easily reach biological lengths exceeding 8 feet and 300 pounds. A massive heavy sturgeon rolling violently in the dark muddy water could easily trick a terrified amateur fisherman into seeing a monster. But the strict biological anatomy of a normal fish does not match a giant horsehead attached to a thick vertical neck. The official scientific explanation simply and conveniently ignored the most intensely disturbing physical details, meticulously reported by highly credible and trained eyewitnesses. The final historical verdict on the legendary creature was about to be completely sealed in the deeply muddy archives of the town. The deeply complex historical timeline of the Altamaha spans several centuries of highly documented encounters from ancient native tribes to modern politicians. The incredibly consistent physical descriptions constantly detail a massive grey beast with an alligator snout and a completely smooth reptilian animal body. The strange creature behaves exactly like a large marine mammal, lacking visible external ears and propelling itself powerfully with a horizontal tail. Despite literally hundreds of highly terrifying documented sightings, the incredibly dark river has never surrendered a definitive biological carcass for rigorous scientific study. The absolute most logical scientific hypothesis constantly points to giant Atlantic sturgeons swimming aggressively through the incredibly shallow and muddy river channels. These massive prehistoric river fish actually possess thick, bony dorsal ridges and can easily survive in the extremely deep pockets of the river. During the highly active mating season, these aggressive heavy fish often splash violently near the water surface, absolutely terrifying inexperienced local boaters. Another highly plausible scientific theory suggests the strange presence of totally lost manatees wandering incredibly far outside their normal warm coastal habitats. A heavily scarred marine manatee moving slowly through the extremely murky water could easily resemble a smooth grey monster with large front flippers. But absolutely, neither a giant sturgeon nor a lost manatee possesses a long snake-like neck capable of rising incredibly high above the water. The existing biological physical evidence simply does not align perfectly with the deeply specific anatomical details provided by highly trained prison guards. The complete lack of any concrete physical biological proof unfortunately allowed the academic scientific community to safely classify the beast as a myth. The small coastal town of Darien enthusiastically embraced the old historical legend, building modern tourist centers and selling merchandise featuring the famous creature. The genuinely terrifying ancient prehistoric predator was slowly and methodically transformed into a highly harmless cartoon mascot to actively attract wealthy coastal tourists. This highly successful commercialization effectively and permanently erased the profound sense of physical dread that once absolutely paralyzed the lonely timbermen and local hunters. The highly serious written historical records were intentionally buried under a massive mountain of cheap plastic souvenirs and highly exaggerated local tourist brochures. The absolutely genuine physical fear experienced directly by Captain Delano in 1830 was tragically reduced to a slightly funny children's bedtime story, but the incredibly deep dark waters of the Altamaha River remain completely and entirely indifferent to the trivial commercial activities on the shore. The incredibly complex myriad of small twisting streams and abandoned flooded colonial rice fields continue to provide a truly massive labyrinth of darkness. There are definitely still extremely deep pockets of the river today, where highly advanced electronic sonar cannot physically penetrate the thick layers of mud. The highly successful modern environmental conservancy efforts have thankfully protected the massive river basin from experiencing total industrial destruction over the recent decades. By successfully saving the highly delicate natural ecosystem, the local authorities absolutely accidentally preserved the perfect hiding spot for a massive unknown predator. The highly experienced local commercial fishermen still adamantly refuse to drop their heavy iron anchors near the deep bends during the foggy mornings. The massive, violent splashing sounds still echo loudly through the incredibly dark marshlands exactly as they did when the native tribes ruled the land. The official academic scientific institutions definitively closed the book on the legendary monster, totally refusing to fund any highly serious aquatic investigative expeditions. They arrogantly decided that the complete absence of a captured physical specimen was absolute definitive proof of the creature's total and complete non-existence. This profound institutional bureaucratic arrogance totally left the local rural residents to face the incredibly dark water alone without any serious institutional support. The incredibly muddy riverbanks actually still occasionally hold massive physical tracks that absolutely no known native animal could possibly ever leave behind. If the terrifying creature is simply a completely harmless oversized fish, why do highly experienced sailors continue to successfully flee the river in absolute terror? If there is absolutely nothing ancient and terrifying hiding in the incredibly deep mud, who finally decided the deep channels should never be fully mapped?